Hi, and welcome to Dip In and Out with Lucy, the podcast that opens up the discussion around domestic abuse. I'm sitting down today with the fabulous Alice. I think Alice will be better equipped to explain who she is and what she does than I am. So over to you, Alice.
Hello, Lucy. Hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah.
I'm Alice Smith. I do quite a lot of different things, really. I am a teacher for about 20 years now, an English teacher. I'm a writer. I love writing books and blogs and hoping to get published. And I've written a guide called the 361 Recovery Guide after launching a group for women survivors such as myself, which helps people on their road to recovery with a mental health focus. More about that later, maybe. And I'm a mother of 2 sons. And then I always say at the end, I'm an optimist. So I think as a campaigner as well for about 8 years now, I think you have to remain an optimist as well as other things when you hear what people say about you. So yeah, I would say an optimist above all.
I love that. I absolutely love that. And especially when you're working around something that is such a difficult subject as domestic abuse, remaining optimistic isn't always easy, is it?
No, I don't ascribe to I did go for a trusteeship with Women's Aid. By the way, Women's Aid, you need to change your title. It is just stale. But yeah, Women's Aid, I went for a trusteeship there, was actually lived experience expert, so I was a shoo-in for it. But unfortunately, I lost the interview in the first few minutes where they said, what do you think of our mission statement? And it said, eliminate violence, all violence. And I said, you can't do that. So although I am an optimist, didn't get that job. Although I am an optimist, I'm a realist. Absolute pragmatist, because we cannot eliminate it. Annoys me when I see this. We can't get rid of every act of violence in the world ever. But it's a noble cause, but maybe you don't put it in front of me and ask me to comment on it, because I will be more of a down-to-earth realist about what's happening in the world, violence-wise and gender-wise.
And that's so true. And I think a lot of the time as well, when you have lived experience of domestic abuse, when people use certain terms and certain phrases, it can 100% make you think, no, that's no, I don't agree with that. And you have every right to, because it's your experience. And I always say this, every lived experience of domestic abuse is unique to that person. There may be threads and similarities running through different situations, but no 2 situations are the same, which is why it makes it so complex, it's probably why people don't really understand, as much as, conversations have improved over the years and actually talking about domestic abuse has become more, I wouldn't say commonplace, but it's getting there slowly. And I think that's a difficulty when we use quite big terms like, you say, eliminate, or will, eradicate it completely. The problem is you are then thinking that you're in control, but that it's the perpetrator that is choosing to behave like that. So unless you can change how somebody behaves, then it's going to be very difficult, isn't it?
Yeah, it's not just that. In my opinion, society actually rewards the abuser going through the judiciary system. I also went to be a magistrate. I really wanted to do that. And I was thrown out at the second stage for being racist and not understanding addiction. This made me laugh. The racist part in the letter was because I said that female genital mutilation still exists, because I've worked in a college in Birmingham where when you shut the toilet door, there was a big notice about it. So I know it still exists. But they didn't like that comment because it's too real. And secondly, I don't understand addiction, because I said that sometimes when you start off on weed, you can end up further addicted. This is ironic because I've been sober for 6.5 years, so I have absolute experience of being an addict with an addict brain. So I think with both of those examples, I've shown you how the door can be shut on a survivor, because there's a variety of things, but I'm 8 years into my recovery now. I started off in 2015 touring 3 stage shows about domestic abuse. And it's interesting, you were saying then, I was a drag queen in those shows, and the word domestic abuse in Edinburgh Fringe, people would take the leaflet off me and say, what? Because it just wasn't, well, first of all, the female drag queens weren't popular at that time. They have been, but they weren't actually popular at that point.
Yeah.
So that was a surprise. And then secondly, to be talking about domestic abuse. And I've seen that arc now to where, in a way, I think the market's flooded now. So people have stopped listening to a certain extent. But there's a lot of shame as well associated with coming out and saying you're a survivor. And then when you go out into these arenas, like to be a trustee or a magistrate, I experienced what this year I've come to call the lived experience glass ceiling, which is only so far and no further. So it was okay for me to do 361 recovery program. It's okay for me to go back into teaching, although I did get sacked from teaching when they found out that I was having my house repossessed, because that was embarrassing. And it's okay to have a podcast. It was okay to do shows, although the tabloids took offense to my shows at that point, the Daily Mail and the Sun, because I was talking about something that they didn't really want spoken about. But it's not okay to go into positions of power. So that's, my work's really come on from entertaining in a burlesque show in 2015 to 8 years later, attempting to get into these spaces and having door after door slammed in my face because I'm not making the right noises as a survivor. I'm not staying a victim. I'm not staying a survivor. I'm actually becoming a challenger. What I really want is to bring people. I want to do it. I want to get into these spaces. Then I want to bring other people in.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think the irony where you were just saying then about trying to get into those spaces, and a blog I'd done a while ago that I'd wanted to do was Hide in Plain Sight, because ironically, although victims and survivors can't get into those places, perpetrators more often than not are already there. And it's actually promoting them and giving them that platform to say, that person is a charmer, they're this, they're that, they're wonderful, they're not making any of the wrong noises, they're not making any waves. But actually, you know, behind those closed doors, they are a perpetrator very, very often, because it's the power and control. That's what they crave. And
that's so true. Yeah. And there's I've come across a lot of narcissistic women in the charity world. So yeah, at the end of this 8-year arc from theatre, which is full of narcissists, we go to charities which poor naive Alice thought they wanted to help us, and I won't name them, but there's quite a few narcissistic women who are doing the door slamming because they've got their power and they want to keep hold of it. And what I'm really going to push for next year is for more trauma-informed spaces in charities. So at the moment, we've got people with lived experience, in my opinion, being wheeled on, very often not paid. You might be invited to something, but we have to pay to get there. We have to share our story, and they're selling tickets on it. I started off like that. I'm saying now, no, I'm saying to people with lived experience listening, don't give your story away like it is your story, and it shouldn't be used to sell tickets. You shouldn't feel uncomfortable. You should be offered something afterwards. So I did like a vigil in Chester a couple of years ago, probably the last time I performed, and they just gave me a piece of apple pie afterwards, and I was shaking because they decided to do it Friday night, drink night, you know.
Oh God, everybody
with the drink at the Cross in Chester, if anyone knows Chester. And there was me, you know, it's like doing my angry survivor poetry, as the CEO called it after, which is offensive. It's like so I think there's a lot to do, is what I'm saying. I'm on the edges, I'm on the fringe. I've always been on the fringes of pushing something that isn't there yet, and I've paid the price. I went in the tabloids after the shows and they decimated me, and I lost another job through that and was shamed in the tabloids. And then I've restored myself back now, but the cost of being a campaigner in this charity space now is the things that people say to you, the doors slammed, the gaslighting, the abuse tactics that go on when people want to keep their power.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, a lot of the time it's because you are saying things that people don't want to hear, do they? They don't want to hear the stories that are true. And more often than not, I think I've said this a few times, is especially when I myself worked as sort of facilitating groups, that kind of thing, is it didn't matter what anybody told me. Whatever a victim or survivor said, I would believe it, because at the end of the day, truth is stranger than fiction. And it's so hard sometimes when people sort of sit there in front of you and say, you're not going to believe this. Try me. Absolutely try me. Because, you know, what have you got to gain by, you know, coming? And half the time you couldn't come up with a story of what that person has been through, because you couldn't imagine it. You just couldn't. And that's why I will always say, you know, the one thing I talked about in a previous podcast with Mark Brooks, we were talking about believability, you know, and a lot of the time for male victims, it is a case of, will I be believed? And I think it's a case for the, you know, for most victims really, is, will I be believed? Is anyone going to listen to me? You know, and a lot of the time, the one thing I can't stand is that when you get the alleged abuse, you know, the alleged, and that's one that has always kind of stuck with me, and I find that one quite difficult to bear, because, you know, why do people not go and report abuse? Because they don't think they'll be believed. So it's not that it's alleged, it has actually happened. They just don't feel comfortable taking it to an authority where they think, well, A, am I going to be believed, and what's actually going to happen? You know, you're putting yourself at risk.
Yeah, the judiciary system needs a complete overhaul, starting with magistrates. You know, in the interview, they were all over 60 and white. There's nothing wrong with that, but it wasn't just that. It was their middle class values that they were putting onto me. They actually stigmatized me at the start for having my house repossessed before we even start, and said, that's criminal. You know, you've committed a crime there. Like, do you understand anything about what can happen and how your house can be repossessed at the end of abuse? No. But the judiciary system, you know, I think we all know, preaching to the converted re-traumatizes. So when I went through the judiciary system 8 years ago, I had my ex-husband standing behind me while they searched me, going through, you know, those machines they have in court. I mean, I was 1,000 out of 1,000 on my PTSD scale before I got into court, because I was being searched with him behind me,
vulnerable,
where he was. And then to add insult to injury, he then decided that he needed a special room because I was scaring him. So yeah, it's this idea that the abuser just has a field day in the judiciary system. It's going to take hundreds of years to dismantle it, because if you look back, it's from white patriarchy. That's it. You know, it's from the days where women were sold, you know, marriage, it was essentially that event, you know, it was sort of like just goods, and you came with a few cattle and stuff. That's where it's from, and it needs to be, just as marriage has been overhauled and is evolved into fantastic things now, so the judiciary system, it just needs to be demolished and started again, I think.
And that's the thing, you know, when you were saying before about trauma-informed approach, you know, that's where the people that are in authority, you know, whether it's magistrates, police officers, whoever, you know, they, at the end of the day, need to have that approach to know how to speak to somebody. Tracy Bradford had said something interestingly in the podcast recently about, she had an individual, and if she could only go back to that moment, but they had no training. And I'm not sure what training goes on in this day and age, but unfortunately, I think there's a severe lack of training and understanding, because, you know, we look at domestic abuse as being very much a physical thing, and actually it's a lot more than that, and it's a lot more complex than that. And when you're going into these arenas with people who, in, you know, a more, I don't know, not necessarily successful, but they're more powerful than you are, then the difficulty is there's already an unconscious bias there from that individual judging you before you've even opened your mouth.
Yeah, this is what I found in the magistracy. They were saying, do you know what a blended family is? Don't worry, we'll tell you in the training. And I was like, are you for real? You know, like, obviously I've had a second marriage with my sons in there. Like, you know, that's what the training is. The training is for white middle class people who have decided that it's an us and them situation. There was some other really dodgy questions. Like, one of the questions was, what would you do if you came out and a fellow magistrate said, oh, that's just another, it was something like, that's just another stupid woman that, you know, deserves what she got. And I said, well, I would, you know, I would pick up this person straight away. And I would, you know, and then I said, why did you ask me that question? And he said, because that happens all the time. So you've got this magistracy. I'm sure there are really good magistrates, by the way, but as a block, as you've got a certain type of person. So I think rather than training, and I'm going to do more on this next year, we need people with lived experience in these places. So but just look what happened there. The past, like the repossession, which was caused by the abusive husband, actually financial abuse, it goes on as a dark mark in your interview. So already you're stigmatized. So it's like, I can understand it's scary. It's scary to let us in, to let people who don't look like you, they don't sound like you, and you've been brought up to think that they were chaotic. But all of this has to change, because if you look at someone who's had trauma in their lives, especially early on, there is that chaotic element. I don't really like that word, but that's what another word I heard in the magistracy, chaotic lives. It's like, I hate it, but I feel like it could be applied to me. So it's just this, you know, it's about trying to understand each other, I think, rather than feel scared and threatened by each other.
Yeah. And I think, you know, you are right in terms of when we talk about if it's something that could have happened in your early childhood, how are we ever going to change the future and the children that are growing up now and probably statistically, as they say, would be in a domestically abusive household? How is anything going to change if they aren't made aware of the boundaries that they can say, this is my boundary, I'm saying no, you know, until that changes. I'm a big believer that, you know, secondary schools, it's fantastic. We have a lot of the healthy relationship talks, don't we? And different organizations go in and talk to teenagers. But a lot of the time that learned behavior for that teenager is established by then. And so when we look at sort of primary, maybe even year 6, children are a lot more intelligent than we give them credit for. And especially in this day and age with technology, with all the social media and everything else, they grow up a lot faster, I think, than they know a lot more. My youngest knows a lot more than I ever did at 10 years of age, but going on 11. But if we give them the sort of respect in a way to say, you have the right to have these boundaries, you have the right to these feelings and thoughts, you know, then that potentially in the future could change things. If we just carry on going along saying you have to put up with this, and then when you get to secondary school, we'll talk about it then. How many children are kind of lost by that point who believe that now is normal behavior?
Yeah, and we've got this kind of like, say, third generation trauma now. So trauma is passed through the generations, isn't it? So you've got children now who, you know, their trauma, like my mom and dad were in the Second World War, and it all passed down to me. And then I passed it down differently, but we passed it down. Being in schools for 15 years, so I know something about education. It makes me cry. I saw something on LinkedIn this week about how that guy that they've employed, he's absolutely clueless about trauma-informed education. So what he's doing is he's going the absolute opposite of what you've just suggested. Did you see? So he's actually going to take away all the spaces where you can actually just sit and just be for a while. Like in drama, I used to teach drama, no surprise there. And in English to a certain extent, if you've got a good English teacher, and PE and things like that, just reduce them down. And so when I saw that, I thought, my God, it's going to get worse. It's like, because if you've got a home life that's like really traumatic, you know, then you really need school to be helping you out, because with the best will in the world, you're still going home every day, aren't you, to that environment?
Absolutely. And I think that's as well why with the website and the podcast that I'm doing, I hope that if people are reading different blogs and guest blogs and listening to the podcast, is that if they can then educate themselves to then talk to their children and say, you know, because it could be that you're still living. That's one that always gets me when people obviously, why don't you leave? Well, actually, a lot of the time people choose to stay in an abusive relationship for a number of reasons, and none of us can judge that because we're not in their shoes, so we don't know why, and we don't know the full story. But if you do, and you and your child are living in that situation, but it also happens in post-separation abuse as well, you know, how do you talk to your child about how they're being treated and how you can help them, you know? And I think if we're not going to get that as much through the schools, then we need to be more educated ourselves to say, okay, so that situation, the way that person spoke to you or treated you is unacceptable on any level, you know, and depending on obviously what the situation is. But I think if we don't do that, we are running a risk now of these children who've already been through COVID lockdown at home a lot more with parents that, you know, are going to display different behaviors maybe that the child hasn't picked up on as much because they were out at school or playing with friends or whatever. And I think if we don't start making it a conversation that children can be involved in, then we're in a really dangerous situation.
Yeah, I agree.
And it is scary to think that we're going to go the other way, because, you know, that's schools are for a lot of children, that's their safe haven. You know, for work, for a victim or survivor of domestic abuse, work can be your safe haven. It can be somewhere where you feel that you actually can go and you don't maybe have to think about it all day. You can try and put your head in a different, you know, mindset and get to work. A lot of people do that. But I think the difficulty is if we aren't all talking about it, if we aren't all calling it out for what it is, then it is unfortunately normal to people, and it is normal to those children. And that for me is a world I certainly don't want to be living in.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at who's creating the laws in education now, they've more or less all been educated at boarding school, which is now classed as a trauma to send your child to a boarding school at 11.
Yeah.
So it's going to take it. They haven't even, a lot of them, got the background of a normal school.
Yes.
So they've been traumatized at 11 for whatever reason. That I'm not actually against private schools. I've taught in two, but I'm just talking. I'm just saying, as a looking down from above kind of thing. Because I still teach people to go to these schools, but I'm saying it is classed as a trauma now to part a child at 11 from their parents. So you think about the educators there, like that the educators aren't educators anymore, are they? They're people who've been taught to emotionally repress everything from the age of 11.
Absolutely.
And so I think you can see that flooding into the school system. So I'm glad I'm not in it anymore, to be honest. And then you sorry.
No, you go.
And you've also got the teachers who are surviving on alcohol and coffee. And I've seen many teachers get a pen and tick off the dates. I'd be like, why are you doing that? Because this feels like a prison. So if you've got people like that teaching your kids, also in classrooms, 3 years after my repossession, I was going around the main cities of the UK in colleges. And I mean the main cities. I went all over the place, supply teaching. And again, I heard teachers saying that the people who had single parents, no wonder they are as they are. So you've got massive of old-fashioned stigma. I'm quite annoyed about this in classrooms. So we need to weed out these people, this culture, and get a different culture in classrooms. If we did, I'd go back in.
Yeah.
If we had more dynamic people who know what it is to live in the real world, then I'd go back in.
I agree. And I think it shouldn't, I've said this recently again, I think it was with Tracy Bradford, it should not be a lottery that you have a good teacher for your child that is informed and does understand it. Maybe that they've been through it themselves so that they can relate and then they can see what's going on with that child. It shouldn't be a lottery that you have a teacher that is aware. It shouldn't be a lottery that you have children's services, social workers, police, magistrate, whoever, to be aware and understand the levels, not even just the complexities, the levels of abuse and how it can be very insidious. And it isn't always that your child's going to come in or mum's going to come to the school gate with bruises, or dad, or whoever. It's not, it's so much more insidious and complex than that, and on so many different levels, that if we don't even try to understand, then you are putting yourself at the mercy of the gods, if you like. And if you get somebody that can help, well, lucky you. And that's frightening. That is very frightening.
Yeah, I mean, it is. I just think all of the systems need to be more trauma informed, or we could go on to hospitals as well, because I broke my ankle last year, and within 7 days my PTSD was the worst I've ever had. I just was like lying, sniveling in a ball. And it's just little things like, make the bins in hospitals slow release, because otherwise you've got the huge banging of the bins all night long. And if you've got PTSD, every time it bangs, they're just small things, that and obviously make the staff informed, because a lot of the staff didn't know what it was, or they didn't understand what I was talking about, because I've only broken my leg, but I was in there for 16 days. Now, how did that happen from 7 days? I'll tell you, the bins, men approaching me, even when I was on the toilet, coming at me all the time, the male workers, even when I asked them not to. So I'm not listening to the patients about triggers. And what I'd really love to do, if I had all the time and money in the world, is to get something going in hospitals for survivors of abuse. If there's anyone listening out there who wants to help me, because it was the most awful experience I've ever had. I didn't have any family, no visitors, no. I had a friend advocate for me in the end on the phone, but she lived in London. But, just to have somebody, it would be great to have people in hospitals who understand what it's like to be a survivor going back into hospital. Because I don't know about you, it really triggers me in hospitals. So
I can only imagine, and I'm just thinking, you go into hospital, so you're going in for something, you're putting yourself in a vulnerable state by going into hospital. I don't know anybody that actually genuinely enjoys going into hospital, let's be honest, and if they do, well, then up to them. But more often than not, you go in for a reason, and it is scary because you're not in your own surroundings. And if you are somebody that has experienced abuse, you need those points of comfort and stability and security to say, I'm okay, I'm all right, I'm not, in danger. It's not your fight flight mode going into overdrive. But yeah, absolutely, a door slamming, a cupboard slamming, a bin slamming, you get people, and when they do this, you go, what's wrong with you? Well, I tell you what that is. That's being scared of loud noises for good reason. And I'm not going to explain myself. But it is difficult, and we shouldn't be put in that situation where you feel that you have to explain, oh, I'm sorry, the reason I'm reacting like this is because of this. Those red flags, those signs should be there for those who are there to take care of you and look after you. Should be able to see and go, hang on a minute, you know what, I've done some training in this, maybe, just maybe, this person needs a little bit of extra care and understanding. And that I 100% agree, and GP surgeries as well. We need to be more understanding, and it is that trauma-informed approach to every area. And actually, I've done some trauma-informed training myself, and I loved it. I absolutely loved it, because it was just, get it, okay, brilliant. And it's so important. I think you're right. I think everybody should be able to do it. I think we should all be able to be that little bit more informed. And again, family and friends, how hard is it for them when they don't really know how to respond or react? Because if they say, I know, then that's going to set you off, because you're going to say, well, you don't, do you? Because you're not me, so you can't understand. We need to be able to educate family and friends as well, and say, okay, well, maybe today they just want you to sit with them and listen. They just want you to be there for them. And if they don't say anything, well, that's up to them. If they do choose to start talking, then just listen. Don't say I know, don't say I understand. It's all these kind of things that if maybe people would open up more, and maybe victims and survivors would, if they felt that there was that level of trust and safety there. And I think there is so little of that around, that there's so many people not wanting to share, because what's the point? Why should I?
I feel like I'm going to bring my optimism back here, because I think we will. I think we will get that. I don't think I'll see it in my lifetime. All the things that I'm fighting for, talking about, campaigning for, I don't believe I'll see them, because, you know, it's going to take ages. But if we sum up the whole thing, it's like walking through the world after abuse with PTSD, for instance. And maybe somebody's got undiagnosed PTSD that's listening, like they're like, oh, can you have that after abuse? Yes, you can. Although I must quote my headmaster on asking me to leave. You haven't been in a war, have you? But yeah, I'm going to name and shame him at some point because he's still there. But yeah,
You've not been in a war. Wow.
Yeah, that's a really old one that he decided to pull out of the hat. But yeah, it's about walking through this world, through the systems of life. So you can't avoid going into hospital if you've broken your ankle, and look what happened there. You very often get absolutely tangled up in the judiciary at the abuser's hands, because they have a high old time and they have so much fun with you, with the absolute blind spotted judges and other people who are there. And you might not have any representation. I didn't. So there you are. They've got really good lawyers. And you're fighting over nothing anyway, because you don't own anything. And then you've got the education system that's churning out the next generation of people who are going to go into those relationships and then go into the judiciary and then maybe go into hospital. So it's about, my conversations now are about, like I said earlier, getting people like myself into spaces where we can say, this is how it is, you know, this is how it feels, this is, you know, this isn't going to work, this might work if you make a few tweaks. And what I call all of this is beyond. So when I was doing 361 recovery, it was victim, survivor, what lies beyond. And I thought about that in lockdown. I was staring for ages. I thought it was going crazy. I had it up on my wardrobe, and it just came eventually. Like, it must have been about 8 months. And I didn't really understand it. And then from there, that's what as I'm going along on my little path, I'm thinking more and more about beyond and what that is. And I think that is after survival. Because if you look in the newspapers, you look at anything that's system, it's victim and survivor. So I was asked to comment on the draft domestic abuse bill 2019, and this is where the wardrobe staring came from, because I looked through and I was like, the first 4 pages were like, should we call them victims or should we call them survivors? And that was what the bill was talking about for 4 pages. And then after 4 pages it said victims. And I thought, hang on, isn't there anything else? And then I looked through the bill, and it was basically all about social housing. And I thought, I'm paying a private landlord. Like, you know, I don't see myself in the bill. And that's where it came from. And as I've gone on, I keep thinking, I don't see myself in this, and people like me. I just don't see it. Like, I don't consider myself a victim. I will call myself a survivor, because in Zoom meetings, it's like, what do you say? So I just say it, but I haven't come up with what it is yet, but it's sort of, I've decided it's called happy enough, with a full stop in between. The third stage is happy enough and happy enough. Because every so often I'll say to myself, oh, I'm happy enough today. That's like, after what I've been through, that's good enough for me.
Happy, good enough for that.
Happy enough. Because I realistically don't think I'm going to meet Prince Charming tomorrow and he's going to whisk me up my feet. So yeah, happy enough. Some people say thriving, don't they? But I find that a bit cliched. So like, I'm thinking, well, what else? And the fact that I can't come up with anything means that there's not enough of it around. There's not enough people on LinkedIn are banging on about victims. They're banging on about being survivors, but let's hear a bit more about like what happens to them next. Do you know what? That they go back to be victims sometimes, don't they? So
well, exactly. And you can feel like a survivor and still end up going back and then come out. And it's I think what's really difficult as well is when and in the same sort of vein, when people talk about, you know, moving on, I always feel very much it's a case of moving forward. I don't think you can ever this is just my opinion. I don't think you can ever move on, as in, say, just that's done, see you later, this is now my brand spanking new life, because unfortunately that is there, it is part of you now, and it's always going to be with you.
Loads of people do that though.
Yeah, and I just think for me, it is more a case of moving forward, and there are days where you end up going backwards again, and then you have to move forward again. So I just constantly see it as a moving forward slowly at your own pace, not anyone else's pace, and taking it day by day, because there are, like we all have in life, good days, bad days. And I think moving on is something that I don't believe is possible, because it is there and it is part of you now, and you hopefully maybe have learned from certain things that have happened to you, so you do want to move forward, and you do want, a lot of people do go into working with domestic abuse victims, survivors, and ... because they want, they want to give back, they want to help, they want to, make sure that what's happened to them, it hasn't been in vain, if you like. But I do think it is very, very difficult. And I think you're right. I think victim, survivor, they're all terms that have been used for a very long time. I used to think overcomer was a good one, but I'm not quite sure about that.
See what I mean? There isn't anything that's really good yet.
Yeah.
Victim and survivor are binary, so I like to think of beyond the binary. So if you think about it, we're usually given two choices. Like in that draft domestic bill, we had two.
Yeah.
And you might give your kids carrots or peas. I don't want either. But we're in like a binary world, so we very often, male and female, that's caused a lot of issues. We very often only get two. So I like to start thinking like, actually, there might be more than two. There might be more than two solutions. The third one is what we're all in. All of us that are listening to this, watching it, and have experienced abuse are in this third one. Yeah. Whether you like it or not, you're not a victim, and you're not, the survivor has a time limit. Yeah. So, I loved being a warrior. I even dressed up in a funny Tina Turner wig. I loved being a warrior at that time. I loved that survivor stuff, and it does have a purpose. It's brilliant. It does, and it can give you pride, and it, on bad days, it makes you feel good. But sooner or later, there has to be something else. And I think just walking through the world with the trauma I've experienced, it's really difficult. I do find it difficult. Things we've talked about today, just being in these systems that don't seem to understand. Yeah. And I think that takes a lot of energy up. Absolutely. And I don't think people realize how much energy that can take, whether you're in a courtroom, whether you're in a hospital, whatever it is, you are almost going back into survival mode, if you like, or and it's hard to explain to people how much that does affect you, how much adrenaline is pumping through your body. You're living on your nerves, and it is exhausting. It is absolutely exhausting, and that takes a certain amount of time to get through, and it's not an easy one at all. And I think that's where we do need to get this conversation out there, and as much as possible say it isn't something scary to talk about. I think that's one thing that I've always felt. When you talk about domestic abuse, people find it quite intimidating, and she went there, she said those, that's because there's a stigma attached to it, though. They want you to be quiet. They don't want you to spoil their Christmas meal. Like this this tattoo I had for one of my shows, the poppies symbolized the women that died, because I did a lot of campaigning, how many women had died per week in the UK. Wow. And I used to lay poppies and things like that. But then I went for a Christmas meal 2 years ago, and someone asked me what it was, and it's a Christmas meal. So I thought, I've got to tell them. And it, like you said, it just killed the Christmas meal. Yeah. Not for me. No. But they didn't, they were like, it's like, well, don't ask me then, because I can't possibly just say it's a pretty thing, because it does, it's meaningful. Yeah. So the moral of the story, never ask people about their tattoos. Never ask them the story of it, especially on a Christmas meal. I love that. Do you know what? I'm going to say this now. I only got a tattoo last year at 44, and it's on my wrist, and it's a little cross. And I've never said this before to anybody, why I've done it.
is because of the amount of times in my life I've literally spent doing that, going head in hand. So it was a little bit of kind of making fun, but it makes me happy. And every time I look at it, I can just see myself doing that. So whatever it is that gets you through, whatever it is, I think that keeps you moving forward each day. And I think what people don't realize about those who have experienced domestic abuse is we have senses of humor. You know, we have personalities.
You have to, yeah.
You know, you've got to be able to. And sometimes people are a bit like, I can't believe she's making a joke about herself, or in that situation, or I can't believe she's saying this. But actually, maybe that's your way of coping. That's your way of processing it. That's your way of talking about it. You know,
well, the shows that I used to do, the drag queen character that I was, it was comedy, but it was just that I used to get people to laugh in the arc of this show, and then as they were laughing, introduce something really awful, so they'd be like, it was a bit like, you know, when you're on a roller coaster, people would come up and say, oh my god, it was like that, we were going up and it was all fun, and then we were like, oh, I don't want to see that. So that's similar to, you know, what you were saying about your podcast, dip in and out, have a bit of a laugh, but then
absolutely,
and then just
and then go back. You know, that's the whole point. And I am, the more and more I think about the name, the more proud I am, because it that's just great. For me is so important that you can dip in and out and you can have that conversation. And it doesn't all have to be scary. It can be a conversation where you think, you know what, I'd love to be in that position one day where I feel like that. That's my hope, is that if people listen and they engage with all the different content, then they will think, actually, I'd love to be at that point in my life where I feel like I could joke about my tattoo or joke, and because life is too short, you know.
Everything comes eventually, but it is hard when you're looking at people's content and you feel like they are there and you'll never get there. But believe me, you can get. Yeah,
absolutely.
You can. 100%. But could I give you one of my poems to finish, which is
called please. Oh yay, right. Look at this.
No, it's not cheerful. No, but I don't think I've written one cheerful one.
No, I love it. Go for
it. This one is called We Survive, and I've done this in many countries in the world, quite angrily, and silenced people while they were trying to drink wine and things. So that's been fun, like literally scared them to death with it. So yeah, so that's that. I found that quite funny. Yeah, so it's called We Survive. Okay. We walk with bullet holes in our backs, but we survive. And we don't. Right, we can edit it. We can edit it. Don't worry, we can edit. Martin's a whiz. He can edit. That'll be gone. Can't we just leave it in because it's funny? Okay. We walk with bullet holes in our backs, but we survive. And we don't wear envy yet, but we drink sugared tea to forget, and we survive. We're no longer welcome on our own mats splattered with bills, and we carry a half light that disturbs and chills. We are branded with some invisible debilitation, but we survive. We march for the bus in worn out shoes, and sometimes we lose, but we survive. And those bailiffs' love letters are the price we pay for our freedom. We're hungry now, but hungrier to be free. And we're often beaten, shamed, but we survive untamed. We don't look right. Holes in tights, hairbrush fights, dark-rooted, unsuited to your open plan. But we survive. We sit and stare and bow our head over coffee. We're too knee-jerk to sit comfortably over cake, and we can't fit in with the fake. But we survive. Now we leave through windows. When you're waiting for the train, we want to jump. We want to take life and smack it in the face, bend it back into place. But we can't handle life the way you can with your sure and steady hands. We are handstands, but we survive. You survived, married, smiled, stockpiled. Your life's back on track. We're good at starting again and again, but we never finish any. That's it. I love it, but it's giving me goosebumps on my legs. So
I'm not going to lie, you can't see me, but I'm like, ooh, now. I'm going to say that was absolutely incredible.
It gave me some goosebumps. I've performed that in India on this really huge stage, which is built for models at a runway, and there was me. Oh my God. And it was the biggest thing. It was like it was a huge runway. It was far too big. And I was just doing it. People were talking over me and everything, but some were listening, but they were going, come on, get your clothes up. Like they thought like, what's going on? But yeah, and I've done it in Germany, in the Wave Berlin, Women Against Violence Europe Berlin, because they all got the wine out and said, let's celebrate. And I was like, what are you celebrating? So I did it really angrily there. So it's one of my favorites, because it's beautiful. A bit of an anthem, and within it it was written, what was happening was what was written. So I was thinking about jumping in front of a train, if I'm quite honest, 2015. I did look a mess, and I was going for teaching jobs, and I was having all these letters and bailiffs coming round, because it took 2 years for my house to be repossessed. Anyone who's had that will know how stressful that is. Bailiffs coming in, Halifax phoning you, and every time I came in, there were just letters on the mat. So I love it really. And my shoes were broken. We marched for the bus in worn out shoes, and I couldn't afford to fix them. So it's got everything in there. And I think that's why when you hear it, it just does something to you, because and it helps me remember how hard it was and how horrible it was.
You know what? That's so important as well, because it was just absolutely incredible. And I've always been a big lover of poetry, even as a kid. I love poetry, and it's been a big part of my life. But one thing you just said there that really got me, it is okay to remember, because for a lot of people, I think we just want to forget, we just want to try and move forward, but actually remembering and celebrating yourself for actually being able to get through what some people couldn't, and would be in front of that bus or would drive that car off the road or whatever it took, because actually it is all too much. And it's not just one thing. I always say this, more often than not with domestic abuse, and especially post-separation abuse, I think, is everything's coming at you from every angle. And if you've got children on top of that, you're trying to raise your children and make them happy and not miss out on their childhood, whilst trying to spin 20,000 plates. And it is absolutely hell. And I think to remember, I've never thought of it that way before, but actually remembering is something where you can think to yourself, wow, I did that.
We must remember. I used to do another one. We will remember them in the invisible war. They fell unnoticed. We must remember our old selves.
Yeah.
We must remember like how it felt. If we want to really help others with a passion, we have to meet them where they are. Like, it's no use meeting them all nicey with your nice shoes now. You've got to meet them where you, because I wouldn't have listened to anyone like that. But you see, I never met anyone that was where I was. So I found it really hard. Yeah. And so I just drank a lot instead. So it's up to us. I say survivorship it's a legacy. Like, I think it is a responsibility to remember that person you were, and to meet other people who were there, like with all that crazy town. I mean, that poem is just like walking through the destruction of your life, one person just destroying it all. And I had dogs, I had children, I was trying to build them up while everything crashed down and I lost my house. Like, that's the definition of abuse, isn't it? Extreme abuse. But
absolutely,
you're walking through it, and you're trying to protect these people, and everything's just crashing.
And I was just thinking back to one of the quotes, so poetry and quotes are my kind of world, and things that get you through. And I think one of the ones, I think it's a Winston Churchill quote that I love, was, if you're going through hell, keep going. You're not gonna be in hell, are you? And then start walking back and go. If you're going through it, and that you can maybe see, you don't even see a future, do you? You just know you've got to keep going in that direction, because if you don't, God alone knows what will happen.
Yeah, and that, I think that poem is that, isn't it? It's got
Yeah.
a power because it is somebody. I'm not even bullshitting that. That's where I was when I was, and not only that, I went out performing it, and it was like,
Yeah,
just helping me through, I suppose. But yeah, that's again that beyond that you're talking about. We have to see a future. We can't.
Yeah,
It
see?
isn't there yet. We have
Yeah.
to envision that. It's really important. We have to be able to envision beyond. If we don't, we are going to go under. We are going to jump.
Absolutely.
We have to really dig in and see it.
Yeah.
And like imagine it. So what I did is I imagined this sunlit attic. I wrote a poem, and it was about this sunlit attic, and I ended up living in an attic that was sunlit, and even better, it had a huge window and you could see out onto Weston-super-Mare. And it came to pass, and I thought, how has this happened? How have I got here? You know, like from nothing. It's just like, I mean, you can't have everything you want. Like, I'd love to own a home again. I don't think that's going to happen, but you can have this feeling inside that you're going to be okay. Like, once you face something like that, you just know you're going to be okay, whatever happens, don't you?
I absolutely, I couldn't agree more on that. And I think a lot of the time, what I think would be a lovely thing for those who have experienced domestic abuse to realize is most people's worst case scenarios aren't yours. Most people think, well, worst case scenario is if the bus doesn't come, or if or whatever it is in the day. For somebody that's experienced domestic abuse, your worst case scenario is so much worse than anyone could ever really contemplate. So actually, in some ways, life becomes not easier, but you know that you can cope with that. So whatever the worst case scenario is, for most people, it isn't going to be that, but for you, it has been that. Therefore, you can handle it, and you can, because you've come out the other side of that particular period of your life, and you've taken with it the lessons that you've learned to try and move forward. And like you say, to try and help other people, to try and make sure that people realize that they're not alone. That was one of the biggest reasons I set up You Don't Own Me and the podcast, was because I couldn't bear the thought of anyone ever feeling completely alone. And it doesn't matter. You can have all your friends around, you can have all your family around you, and that's incredible and that's wonderful. But at the end of the day, it's you putting your head on that pillow at night. Not they're doing what they're doing with their life, and that's fine, and they try and be there, but actually it is you and you alone when you turn those lights off and you put your head on the pillow. And that's really what I would never want, is anyone to feel that alone. Yeah,
that's
definitely.
brilliant.
Yeah. So that's why I do it.
You've ended on a positive there. I'm so glad.
We've got to do this again, so please will you come back? Definitely.
Well, yes, I've got 500 poems, so there you are.
Well, we can get you. Listen, you can put them wherever you like. We can put them as a link on the website, whatever you want to do.
No cheery ones.
Cheer. Oh, well, I will end it there. But thank you. This has been an absolute joy. And to say we're talking about domestic abuse, that's saying something, isn't it? This has been an absolute joy. I've loved every minute of it. And
I'm not quite sure what we've talked about, but thank you for the invite. It's been a great chat. We should have had like a tea and cake as well.
No, I think it's a very much needed conversation, and more conversations like this need to be happening all over, definitely. So thank you, Alice. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lucy.